5 dark truths about God that still terrify people today. When most people think about God, they imagine love, mercy, forgiveness, and protection. But the Bible also contains stories so dark and disturbing that people have debated their meaning for thousands of years. From children dying because of a ruler's decisions to cities erased by fire. A father ordered to sacrifice his son. A righteous man whose life was destroyed with divine permission. And a final judgment that threatens the entire world. And while believers interpret these stories as warnings about justice, faith, and the consequences of evil, critics see moral questions that remain almost impossible to answer. So here are 5 dark biblical truths about God, and the final one may completely change the way you imagine the end of the world. God sent death into every unprotected house in Egypt. The book of Exodus says that the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt when God chose Moses to confront Pharaoh and demand their freedom. But Pharaoh refused, so Egypt was struck by a terrifying series of plagues in which water turned to blood, frogs and insects invaded the land, livestock died, painful boils spread across human bodies, hail fell from the sky, and unnatural darkness covered the country. Yet Pharaoh still would not release the Israelites, and that was when God announced the final and most horrifying plague, declaring that every firstborn son in Egypt would die, from the firstborn child of Pharaoh to the firstborn child of a prisoner, while the Israelites were instructed to kill a lamb and mark their doors with its blood, so that the destroyer would pass over their homes. And at midnight death moved across Egypt, leaving such unbearable grief that the Bible describes a great cry rising from the entire nation, because almost every unprotected household had lost someone. And although Pharaoh finally surrendered and allowed the Israelites to leave, the story creates a disturbing question that has never disappeared. Why did children have to die because of Pharaoh's decisions when they had no power over slavery, politics, or the king's refusal, with some theologians arguing that the plague was judgment against an entire oppressive system that had previously murdered Hebrew infants, while others believe the story may preserve the memory of an epidemic, political catastrophe, or ancient liberation legend. But whatever interpretation a person accepts, the image remains horrifying, an entire country waking in darkness, as parents discover that their children are no longer breathing, while only the houses marked with blood remain untouched, making the first Passover both a story of freedom and one of the Bible's darkest examples of innocent people apparently suffering alongside the guilty. God destroyed 2 cities with fire from the sky. Genesis describes Sodom and Gomorrah as cities so violent and corrupt that an enormous outcry against them reached God. But before destroying them, God revealed the plan to Abraham, who asked whether the righteous would be killed together with the wicked. And Abraham began negotiating, first asking if the cities would be spared for 50 righteous inhabitants, then 45, 40, 30, 20, and finally 10, with God agreeing each time. Yet even 10 righteous people were apparently not found, and when 2 angels entered Sodom and stayed at Lot's house, a violent mob surrounded the building and demanded that the visitors be brought outside, causing the angels to strike the attackers with blindness and warn Lot's family to escape immediately without stopping or looking back, after which sulfur and fire fell from the sky and destroyed the cities, their people, and the surrounding land. But during the escape, Lot's wife turned around and was transformed into a pillar of salt, an unforgettable image that has inspired countless theories about whether she looked back from curiosity, grief, disobedience, or a secret desire to return to the condemned city. While historians and researchers have attempted to connect the story to earthquakes, natural gas explosions, burning sulfur, falling cosmic debris, or memories of an ancient settlement destroyed near the Dead Sea. Although no theory has definitively proven the biblical account, and the story becomes even darker because Lot, supposedly one of the people worth rescuing, offered his own daughters to the mob in an attempt to protect his guests, revealing that almost every character was trapped inside a world of violence and moral collapse. So, Sodom and Gomorrah may be understood as literal divine punishment, a memory of a natural catastrophe, or a symbolic warning that a society built upon cruelty will eventually destroy itself. But the mystery remains. If everyone in those cities was judged together, were there truly no innocent children, no victims, and no one who deserved another chance? God commanded a feather to sacrifice his own son. Abraham had waited many years for Isaac, the son through whom God had promised to create a great nation. But after finally giving Abraham this child, God issued an unthinkable command, telling him to take Isaac to a mountain and offer him as a burnt sacrifice. And Abraham did not argue, refuse, or warn anyone, but instead rose early the next morning, gathered wood, fire, and a knife, and began the journey with his son, until Isaac noticed that they had everything needed for a sacrifice, except the animal, and asked his father where the lamb was, to which Abraham mysteriously replied that God would provide it. But when they reached the mountain, Abraham constructed an altar, arranged the wood, tied Isaac down, placed him on top of it, and raised the knife, stopping only when an angel called his name at the final possible second, after which a ram caught in a nearby thicket was sacrificed in Isaac's place. And although religious tradition describes this moment as the ultimate test of Abraham's faith, and some scholars interpret it as a rejection of the child sacrifice practiced by certain ancient cultures, the psychological horror is impossible to ignore, because the Bible never tells us what Isaac felt while his own father bound him, whether he cried, struggled, begged for an explanation, or silently realized that the man he trusted most was preparing to kill him. And the story creates a dangerous question about the boundary between faith and madness, because if someone today claimed that God had commanded the death of a child, we would not celebrate that person's obedience. We would try to stop them. While some theologians argue that Abraham trusted God to resurrect Isaac because the divine promise depended upon Isaac surviving, and Christian interpretations see the event as a foreshadowing of Jesus, yet the darkest possibility remains hidden inside the moment before the angel spoke, because Abraham had already built the altar, bound his son, and placed the knife above him, meaning that for at least one horrifying instant, Isaac knew his father was genuinely willing to end his life in the name of God. God leads Satan to destroy the life of an innocent man. The book of Job begins with heavenly beings appearing before God, including a mysterious figure called the Satan, meaning the accuser or adversary. And when God identifies Job as a blameless, upright, and faithful man, the accuser challenges Job's devotion by claiming that he worships God only because God has protected him and given him wealth, health, and a large family. So God permits the accuser to test Job, and almost immediately Job's livestock are stolen or destroyed, his servants are killed, and a powerful wind causes a house to collapse upon his children, killing every one of them. Yet Job refuses to curse God, causing the accuser to return and argue that any man will surrender everything to save his own body, after which permission is given to attack Job's health as long as his life is spared. and Job becomes covered in painful sores, sits among ashes, and scrapes his skin with broken pottery, while his wife tells him to curse God and die. But the most disturbing part of the story is that Job never knows why any of this is happening, because he cannot see the heavenly conversation that started his suffering, and does not realize that his life has become evidence in a supernatural challenge, while his friends make everything worse. By insisting that suffering must always be punishment, and therefore Job must have committed some hidden crime, even though the reader knows he is suffering precisely because he was considered righteous. And when God finally answers Job from a whirlwind, he does not explain the agreement with the accuser, but instead asks where Job was when the world was created, and whether he can control the stars, the weather, or the creatures of the deep, emphasizing how little a human being understands about existence. And although Job later receives renewed prosperity and has more children, the ending raises another painful question, because new children cannot simply replace the ones who died, leaving the book of Job with one of the darkest messages in the entire Bible. A person can be kind, faithful, and innocent, yet still lose everything without ever receiving an explanation that makes the suffering feel fair. The Bible says God's final judgment could turn the entire world into a nightmare. The book of Revelation describes a sealed scroll being opened and releasing a sequence of catastrophes, beginning with 4 horsemen associated with conquest, war, famine, and death, followed by the sun turning black, the moon becoming like blood, stars appearing to fall from the sky, and terrified people hiding among rocks as they attempt to escape divine wrath. But the nightmare continues. When 7 trumpets sound and fire falls upon the earth, the sea appears to become blood, fresh water turns bitter, darkness covers part of the heavens, and a star called wormwood crashes from the sky, after which an abyss is opened and releases smoke together with horrifying creatures described as locusts prepared for war, possessing human-like faces, hair like women, teeth like lions, armored bodies, and tails capable of inflicting prolonged torment. While later visions introduce monstrous beasts, the mysterious number 666, bowls filled with wrath, unbearable heat, poisoned water, earthquakes, warfare, and a final confrontation between divine and demonic powers. And although some Christians believe these events will literally happen in the future, many scholars interpret Revelation as coded symbolic language about the Roman Empire, persecution, political tyranny, and the struggle between faith and oppressive power, with the infamous number 666 possibly functioning as a coded reference to Emperor Nero. Yet that has not stopped generations of people from connecting Revelation to dictators, pandemics, computer chips, artificial intelligence, financial systems, eclipses, and global wars. Even though every confident prediction of the exact date of the apocalypse has failed, and the Bible itself says that no one knows the day or hour, but what makes this story more terrifying than the others is its scale. Because the earlier accounts involve a family, a city, or a nation, while Revelation imagines judgment reaching the entire planet and even the structure of the universe. And although the book ultimately ends with evil defeated, suffering abolished, tears wiped away, and creation renewed, it leaves humanity with a chilling mystery that no interpretation has completely resolved. Is Revelation describing events that already happened in symbolic form? A pattern of destruction repeated throughout history, or a literal final catastrophe that is still waiting to begin? These stories reveal a side of the Bible rarely seen in comforting quotations or peaceful paintings, A world in which liberation can arrive through death, cities can disappear beneath supernatural fire, faith can place a child beneath a knife, an innocent man can lose everything because of a conversation he never hears, and the salvation of the world can begin with a terrifying apocalypse. So whether you consider these events literal history, symbolic warnings, or ancient attempts to understand disaster and suffering, their darkest questions remain alive today. Why do innocent people suffer? Can destruction ever be called justice? How far should faith be allowed to go? And what would happen if humanity finally faced the full consequences of its actions? Comment the number that disturbed you most and subscribe, because the next biblical mystery may be even darker than the ones we explored today.